See, it's not just a lie, because when you've heard your facilitators tell you in 100 events that they're committed to a world where everyone wins, you know it's a break with that when they're willing to throw you under the bus. When you know that you're not winning, you're in more pain than you've ever been in, you know it's a lie to say this is not a high issue, because you've just said the whole world is your issue. And I'm not the whole world. I'm the client who has stuck with you with 4 facilitators and 100 high events and referred people to you and trusted you. I'm not the world. I'm that person, the person you were formed to serve. And if that person can be thrown under the bus, then what are you doing existing? You don't have a mission statement that says we are committed to sexually abusing our clients and throwing them under the bus when it's convenient to cover up our secrets. If you had a mission statement like that, you would be in integrity, but nobody would hire you. And so the mission doesn't have integrity with the trust needed to have people give you money and time. And so this is the situation here. So later, at one point when I was explaining this to Anne, she said, I know. She said, the best I can say is that we've reenacted your childhood abuse cycle. And I hope it wasn't as bad, hopefully it wasn't as bad as it was when you were a kid. Now that's truth, up to a point. My therapist owes that to me as part of the ethical responsibility of earning that trust. If your therapist will not tell you that truth, they're betraying your sanity and your life. So she owes that statement. But she also owes the integrated action with it, with her own mission. Because it's not a world where everyone wins, when as a result of coming to me, you've ended up worse than if you'd gone to any other therapist in the Bay Area. In other words, because I trusted the facilitators and took this abuse cycle, imagine if instead I'd gone through the yellow pages and called 10 trauma therapists and said, help, help, I've got these fucked up idiots up in Harbin, they teach sex and this and that. All I know is, I'm heartbroken, he won't return my emails, this and that and the other. Well, all 10 therapists would say, this is terrible. You need to go to the police, and I will guide you through this and this and this. And I would have gotten the message that I mattered, which is the deepest wound and the deepest healing within the psyche. You matter. I will protect you. You matter to me. You matter more than my drugs. You matter more than my fantasies. You matter more than my delusions. You matter more than my crazy friends. You matter more than the people who would throw you under the bus. We're here for you. That's our mission. And the other people, they'll come round. They're addicts. They're in trauma. They're idiots. Fine. They'll come round. But your safety, that's what matters. And I'm going to protect that. And I'm going to protect you from myself, frankly, because apparently I'm divided inside because of this. And frankly, Dane, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I set you up for this because I'm in a dual relationship. The reality is my income depends on the other facilitators. Whether I feel safe teaching a workshop depends on whether they hate me or not. They're addicts. They don't know what they're doing. Peter's going to never trust me again for the rest of this lifetime if I do this. And then Sarah's going to hate me because her husband's gone AWOL. And I'm scared. You're one of many clients, and I do care about you, but I don't care enough to see clearly here and do what it takes to protect you. So I'm going to get you to someone who's unbiased. That's the most ethical thing I can do, is acknowledge that I'm compromised and that I set you up to be compromised, because we have so many dual relationships in this organization, so many dual roles. that it's almost impossible to know which way to go when we're this rotten. It's so painful. I'm so sorry, Dane, because you should have had a therapist who was independent of all this. Because you did trust me, and you need someone you can trust. And of course, when a therapist like Peter abuses you, how can you go out and trust someone else? In the middle of the night, you haven't met them, and you don't know what's the problem. Of course, this is heartbreaking. You should never be in this situation, and I am so, so, so sorry. You see, just saying the truth liberates the soul, liberates the psyche. And I'm capable of forgiving those statements. And I'm capable of saying, well, Anne, I understand. Thanks for doing the best thing you can here. Let's get that independent therapist together. Maybe you can talk with them and make sure they're a good sort. You know me. You can tell them a little bit of my history, and so I don't have to feel like a complete stranger. And we'll get this sorted out in the next few hours. And let's continue the mission. Let's continue the focus. See how the world can win with this dynamic. You see, that's available. That part in me is available with an ethical facilitator. See, part of the problem is I went to the facilitators with quite a lot of anger because Peter had betrayed me. I haven't even begun to it, so you'll have to read that in other areas. But Peter had betrayed me on more than 30 occasions by that point, and controlled communication, and lied about it. And the real pivot point was he started to shame me. In one of his emails, he said, Dane, you've got to do your own work. As in, you're the problem. And in another email, he says, I'm really clear this has nothing to do with me. So in other words, as I'm experiencing the biggest explosion of confusion, insanity, betrayal, etc. in my entire life by a paid practitioner, Peter's telling me it has nothing to do with him. And this is echoing, my father's defense mechanism, because as I mentioned, he died during while I was in the Philippines, and the entire facilitator body had thrown me under the bus by saying this is not a high issue and we're not going to read your emails and this and that and the other. And Anne's still trying to mediate something by that point. And I am being hurt more and more by Anne. My pain is escalating by Anne because I know what she can do. I know how much it would help. Meaning it would have solved it for me like that if there were 20 phone calls coming in from the community saying, you matter, because that's the disease. Peter's saying, I don't matter. His addiction matters. And then the facilitators are saying, you don't matter. Our fear and addiction matters. And of course, my parents have said that my entire life. You don't matter. Our lies matter. They say, oh, you matter. And it's like, what do you mean? You actually want to listen to my feelings? Of course. I can talk about 30 seconds before my mother goes into absolute outrage. The outrage that I would tell her my feelings. Because my feelings have no place in that family. Her lies, that's it. And the greatest lie of all is that she can't wait to hear my feelings as long as they are the feelings that she has told me that I should be feeling. And she's been waiting 40 years. She calls up every few years just to see. It's like, have you finally felt the feelings that I told you to feel? It's like, oh, you're at it again, Mom. You want to go through the ritual? How many seconds do you think you can last this time? You didn't last 2 seconds, 2 sentences before. You really after another dose? Just go live your lies, Sherilyn. I mean, I'm not asking you to call me every couple of years to torment you with the truth. Just go. You can find plenty of bimbos in this culture who will tell you what a ruined parent you are, how ungrateful your kids are. They will support you to the end and you will be happy because that's what you want. You need that. And it tears me to pieces. Oh, and you didn't want to hear that either. No, of course, you're the great loving. Okay, go the fuck off and find someone else to peddle your lies to. I've had 2 addicts my entire life. My father died, and I thought I would do him the kindness of piecing my best part together. Of course, I'm completely unintegrated and a mess in this place. But I think the truth generally is a good idea. So I tried to honor what was good in him and thank him for bits of it, and also just point out, you have brought 3 of your 5 children to a suicidal state. I deal with it to the present time. You torment people to the direct extent they are close to you, such that I stay away from you because I don't want to be tormented. You treat me best of all the siblings because I'm the only one who has nothing to do with you. And I know that. I know that the only reason you look up to me and respect me and tell your friends that I'm your best child is because I have nothing to do with you. Because if I had anything to do with you, I would be a shit. Because in you think you're a shit. Of course, you won't talk about that. You're grandiose, but anyone who has anything to do with you is worthless. All right, so I made him a 45-minute recording. I don't know, I hope, and I give it to my brother, who's peddling, making my father's abuser feel comfortable so my father will have him close. I said, if you think this will help him die, share it with him, be with him. He said, Dad listened. He was a terrified 6-year-old. He seemed really scared, the whole thing. But of course, he doesn't want to be a terrified 6-year-old. That's the problem. He wants to turn it into a grandiose, I'm better than everyone formula. And so what he writes back is about his unconditional love, thanking me for my lovely letter. He goes out on a lie. He goes out lying. The biggest lie of his life, that he's done nothing but unconditional love. Not even love, unconditional love. Doesn't matter that it's humanly impossible to love someone unconditionally. If he did, he would have gone out loving Hitler unconditionally. How can you love someone unconditionally if it's on the condition that you're not Hitler? That's a condition, a pretty big one. So Dad hands me his last contract of delusion and lies. Well, what do you want? Do you want to pretend that your dad loved you? Or do you want to see the cowardice? That even in death, you can't give your son the truth of what an addict and what a fearhead and what a shame and all that stuff, that you'd sell them out for an endless amount of time to feel better without even acknowledging that you feel bad. It's like, that's not a parent. That is a terrified, traumatized 6-year-old who would beat the hell out of you when you were small, and when he couldn't get that, then he beats the hell out of you with his lies. Unconditional love for you. So Anne's job was to be my therapist around my father's death, except she had no trust. Because it was clear to me, because she was a completely different person than she'd been in any other relationship, which was a shock in and of itself. How much am I? And she added to my father's lies by telling me how much she loved me, by telling me that love would not go anywhere, and by telling me that she had loved me more than anyone but her family. It's a little bit of a bribe. Every boy, every child, particularly when they've been hurt by their parents, longs for those words. But they long for them to mean something. I longed for those words from Anne when we were doing therapy together. I longed for them to be expressed by her coming to my house and holding me. I longed for them to be expressed by her writing the truth to the community so that I was included. But I got the words in the end, paired with the antithetical action, the antithesis. I'm going to listen to your horror and your pain as much as it takes, but I am not going to go public for you. I'm not going to confront, I'm not going to resign, I'm not going to come over there. I am not going to let you know that you matter most. And indeed, when I sent Anne a confidential letter outlining, as I started to deform the adaptive personality, and this is one of the wounds, when your essence is attacked, you have to manipulate your abusers. There's no other solution if you are in a dependent relationship. And I was in a dependent relationship. I was regressed, I was confused, I was made increasingly insane. I had health crises precipitated by Peter Sandhill's protocol. And these were the people I had trusted to get me out of it. And they were getting me in. And I knew the math was off. And so I began to threaten the facilitators, and that got response, meaning my request for help was punished, my request to tell the truth was attacked, but my threats were satiated. This was a deep grief for me. Children do it semi-unconsciously when they have abusive parents. But to go from that beautiful high, so beautiful, to see who I am, to see who Peter is, and to come down to realize that who was running the show was a fear-based liar, and that the only way that I was going to be safe or sane was to intimidate the fear-based liar into doing something somewhat intelligent. I felt so sad and so hurt by being asked to make that decision, because the decision, the V-shaped wound that I found myself in that got deeper and deeper, was I've just met the most beautiful part of myself that is behaving honorably. And that part is being treated like shit. That part is getting message after message that it's not welcome, that it's not wanted, that we want you to die, go away, we hate you. This is precipitating the deepest wound of my life. Every single time I ask for help or have to repeat myself, the wound is deepening. It is deepening every single time I interact with the facilitators. Because every single time I interact with the facilitators, they are going deeper into their position that you will be sold out to protect our secret. Because this was easy to solve. As I say, a single email from a single facilitator from a single board member. A single email to the lists saying this is what happened and our number one priority is to protect Dane's health, sanity, and safety as a human being in our community. And I am given a circle of protection that is adequate to nurture what is best in me, my truth, my kindness, this part that wants to be born, this part that was murdered by my parents, that led me to feel horrifically suicidal for most of my life because the wound of having what's best in you destroyed to protect what is small and ugly in the parents and what is small and ugly in the school and small and ugly in the culture. The wound of having the soul murdered to avoid the truth is so painful when you've tasted some of it. And that's also the mixed blessing of the New Age household. You know, I was at Findhorn Community at Scotland, and, you know, at age 12, I was reading Ken Carey, working with the channel Lazarus, working with Seth, working with diary, stuff. So when you have a New Age addict scenario, the drug of secrecy and shame is the kingpin around which things evolve. But as long as it's not a direct confrontation with the drug, you learn spiritual things. And so you learn a spiritual thing and then you have it be betrayed by the addiction. You learn another awareness and you have it violated by the addiction. You open up to a sensitivity and then that sensitivity is traumatized out of you with physical violence. When you have an addict that's trying to climb high and go above their addiction, you open up into realms of innocence and then watch them be slaughtered before your eyes. You listen to the grandiose talking of Waldorf teachers and then you watch the terrified face they have when you tell them the truth and watch how they run away and avoid you so that they can hold on to the fantasy of their grandiosity. So you're open up to the possibility of a world where everyone wins, and then pushed into a secret that ensures that everyone loses. Every single person, every single moment that perpetuates this secret is destroying a world where anyone wins, unless you want to count the addict winning. Your addict will kill you and everything good in you until you take the addiction serious enough to respond directly to the pain and reduce the pressure on the addictive persona. The addict's persona has one job: to stop you from feeling so much pain that you commit suicide. That's it. And if the truth that you are in is too painful, it will fill you with sugar and lies and sex and it doesn't matter. It'll sit you in a porn loop or a video game. Its job is to keep you out of pain when you are protecting an abusive environment from the change that needs to occur. Now, the goal and the role of a healer, of a therapist, is to integrate the ego and a healthy map of reality, a reality that works. You have insane maps that lead you to turn left when you need to turn right. You want a map of reality that works, and you want to be integrated with yourself. When you're in dysfunctional situations, as in childhood, the map that is shoved down your throat doesn't work, but it enables the abuser to feel comfortable and sustain the status quo. And the authentic self, which often is a truth teller, is met with hostility, and an adaptive personality is developed to manipulate the environment and to navigate within the culture. When I talked about my parents systematically abusing my children, my younger siblings, which is a big source of grief, one of the things that I'm referring to is that the truth and the authenticity and the innocence in every child was targeted, and each child was asked to develop a manipulative coping persona to, in some way, out of fear and guilt, because remember, my parents were emotional children, would then be asked to manipulate my parents into getting a few breadcrumbs of their basic needs. This is such a disgusting protocol to be in that by the age of 12, and particularly by 13, 14, I was so disgusted because my job was to play the naughty boy, get caught, put up a scene, and then beg. That was one way I could get some attention and stuff, and so that's one role I was supposed to do. And then the other thing was I was supposed to manipulate and entertain my father intellectually by manipulating him mentally into doing something. It was perfectly clear what was going on, but that was his idea. That was an idea of me that he felt safe with, as someone who would grow up to be as manipulative as he was. And so his hit was that he could see through the manipulation that he asked me to do, and then he would give me it because he was so pleased with himself that he saw through the manipulation that he wanted because that was a comfortable image of me. Now, the truth is, even as a child, I didn't lie. And it was not my tendency. The truth was, as a sensitive, I was tuning into my parents and what they needed. And when I saw that it made them relax and feel safe and comfortable, I would do that because they would be nicer to me. It just so happened that what made them relax and feel comfortable were for all of their children to become delinquent and dysfunctional in different ways. And what upset them no end was to hear anything true. Now, this is the sustained execution of the psyche and the soul. And what is brought up is an imposter, is an adaptive caricature that connects with safe points in the parent. The tragedy, of course, is that this is 2 to 10 cents on the dollar, meaning the caricature that is constructed to interact with the parent. It's also somewhat constructed as a bit of a straw man because when the parent knocks that part down, it's not important because it's not real. The real horror is that when the reality starts to show up, when the soul starts to show up, the door slams in the face. Go away. We don't want this part. We don't want that thing around here. And this is the true horror of our cult. It's the true horror meaning I went all the way down into a pain where I was laying on the floor and not able to move. I said the truth in as many ways as I could. I asked for help in as many ways as I could. I reminded, and it was like I was babysitting children with the facilitators, and this part of me, while in pain, was dishonored and insulted. Just one example, when I came up with the apology as the cheapest way for the facilitators to minimize their destructive impact, meaning it wouldn't cost them a dime, and then I spelled it out for them. I said, can you apologize for this, and this, and this, and this? More than 10 things. And a few of them didn't reply at all, part of the protocol of pretending this wasn't a high issue. But a few of them did, like Felicia, and they obviously met about this because it was a common statement. A couple of them decided that they were going to protect high and not implicate themselves by actually apologizing for a sustained pattern of criminal and therapeutic negligence that would show honor to my intelligence. So what they instead did was they ignored everything that I said and said, we're very sorry that you had such a difficult childhood. In other words, we're going to apologize that your parents abused you, which of course they're not responsible for. The only way they're responsible for is if you understand that if my parents had gone to these facilitators for therapy and come out as fucked up and crazy with PTSD as I did, then if I had children and the facilitators abused them as well as me, then they could apologize that they had their new client had such fucked up parents because they had fucked them up. Because that's what this does. When you attack what is healthy and ethical, what is true and authentic, and pamper that which is adaptive and manipulative. You build up a message that you will not survive in this cult, in this facilitator community, unless you are an adaptive and inauthentic self. Because the authentic part of me cared deeply for for the community, for understanding what this meant for myself, and understood what needed to be shifted in the environment to be in integrity with the mission. But that truth was not welcome, nor were the shifts in behavior welcome. That's the parent turning white and going away to continue the abuse protocol that destroys the sanity of the children in their care, but protects the secret, the delusion, and the shame, protects the addictive cycle. So this is one of the deepest wounds, and it's one of the reasons that I've gone into the court process gingerly, meaning it is the easiest thing in the world to manipulate the facilitators into behaving reasonably ethically. In fact, when I wrote a letter to Ann Watts highlighting the facilitator abuse, and I wrote it a little bit as if it was like a New York Times article. Facilitator abuses client for this, this, that, the other. The high facilitator sexually abuses client under influence of psychedelics. I did it. By this time, I already knew that I was being thrown under the bus, and so I wrote this to bring some awareness to the fear parts in the facilitators that were running the show. Now, this itself was already a deep wounding, because when you have to manipulate your therapists to be slightly more adult, you are in hostile terrain to the soul. Manipulation is not good for either side in the healthy sense. It is a coping mechanism in a sociopathic environment. The sociopathic environment is not healthy and the manipulation is not healthy. However, depending on how you look at it, you do survive by manipulation. And if you look at the hierarchy of human needs, survival comes before damage to the soul and the physical body. So you have to become a manipulative son of a bitch to get a little bit of attention, this and that and the other, but you make it through into your adolescent. Is that better or worse than ending up insane because the pain of connecting with who you really are and watching the hatred that is dumped on that from all sides is just so intense that you can't bear to connect it. You're not going to manipulate anyone, but you can't move. You're in so much pain. And so part of what this mapping part of me does is get, really angry at this, because this is not personal. It's like, do you mean to say that if a high team member or participant cottons on to your bullshit and starts telling the truth, that you'd rather kill them than change and be in integrity with your own fucking mission? This is an alarm, looking at it through the pattern lens, because it's not personal. Something the high facilitators are pleased to teach. Don't take it personally. Don't. What the high facilitators have done in this instance, they will do to your daughter, themselves, their own soul, and everything decent in them. It's not personal. But what does that say when a school is going to behave that way? It's one thing when parents are paying to abuse their children. It's another thing when they're getting a tax credit to be paid to abuse their therapeutic patients when they're supposed to be healing the insanity caused by the parents. And so, as I say, Anne voiced it, which I think was good, but she split herself by not acting on it, meaning she believed in the fear pattern more than she believed in the truth. And so she acted out of fear. And this is not what you teach a patient who needs you, who's trying to bond with you, because we do need love and belonging, most particularly when we're in a traumatized state. I was completely isolated at the time. There was no one else to bond to. Which means it's a very, very big responsibility and a very sacred role to, at a moment when a human being might wake up, might become aware of who they are, to not hammer that beauty with bricks and start gunning them down, because what they're becoming aware of includes part of your own shit, part of your own addiction, part of your own racket. And if you're too naive to understand that you have a racket and that you have shit, then you definitely do not want to be around someone who is similarly naive while they are shooting you down. It's a conspiracy that damages everyone, because we need people to tell the truth. We need whistleblowers. We need people who will take a stand for our potential, and who will sacrifice their addictions, and who will ask for help when that is too much. And so that's a big pivot point. Will you ask for help? Because the community was big enough to help, because they weren't fighting the addiction. You see, Anne was fighting the addiction because and part of the addiction is the superhuman image. The facilitators perform a great image in front of the room, 24/7, we're going to meet everyone, we're loving everyone, we're great together, so there's this superhuman image, which often ties in with the superhuman shame-based parent who can't make any mistakes. And you lose that as soon as you realize your facilitators are cheating on each other, lying to each other, selling out a patient. Like, how can you put on the act in front of the room when that's public knowledge? So that's part of the addiction. To say, we're not human like the rest of us, we're superhuman. Nothing can be questioned. And that's it's a facade, of course. It's a dangerous one. And it needs to be punctured. So let's look at the board of directors and their ethical responsibility. So in the legal framework, the board of directors have the seat of power. They have the authority to hire and fire every facilitator, to put forth motions and have them be voted on, because they have the legal authority for the entire organization. And the formation of the Human Awareness Institute requires a set of bylaws. It also, a mission. This is what we're about. A nonprofit has an ethic of we don't do anything for money, meaning if the only reason Dane hasn't been given a refund for being abused, just as one example, is because of money, not because it's the right thing for us to do, that's a for-profit enterprise, because you don't screw the public for extra money and then say this is a nonprofit. No, that's a for-profit enterprise. We're trying to keep our coffers at this level of whatever more than we're trying to help our people. So the board of directors' responsibility upon hearing that a facilitator that they appoint and support has sexually abused a client of the Human Awareness Institute is to hire someone outside of the organization for example, a trauma therapist, a sexual abuse therapist, a consultant around ethics, and have them look into what's going on so as there's no conflict of interest, and to protect the mission from being contaminated by personal addictions and agendas within the facilitator body. And so their job is to reach out and secure emergency support for the client, because I told all of the facilitators that I nearly got into a fatal traffic accident because the eruption of feelings induced by Peter Sandhill came at me explosively because Peter was controlling and blocking communication that would allow the feelings to integrate. So an incredible amount of intense energy that I had asked him to help me integrate was instead building up in an unintegrated state and turning sour. Falling in love with him, etc., was turning sour, being uncontained. It was starting to do damage in my body and drive me crazy because it wasn't integrated. That's all crazy is you've got energy that is not integrated with reality. Well, when your abuser doesn't want that energy to come out as truth, keeping you in a suspended state like that is one way to control the energy. It's also, the epitome of therapeutic abuse and evil, to invoke this energy under the influence of push psychedelics and pressure, and then to run from the truth of that energy so as not to be responsible, not to respond. So he's in that dynamic. It's eventually caught up with me, and I'm flying off the handle on Highway 101, and I communicate this to the facilitators, which is telling them, the person you trained and recommended is damaging my life and other innocent people on the road, and that I need immediate help. And it's also telling them how to help me. Please hold me and listen to me. Well, after Peter got done telling me that he'd never trust me again, he also told me that the board was brought in around this and that he might lose his job. Horror of horrors. And I felt pity for Peter. And so I said, well, I'm not trying to get you to lose your job. I'm trying to get help. I haven't gotten any help by this time. And he said, well, if you can just tell the board anything, that would help me get my job. And so I thought of something. I said, look, if you thought Peter was good enough before, surely he's learned something from all this, so he's even better now. And I enabled my abuser, who, after promising to show up and learn and grow from that situation, promptly turned his back on me as soon as he got his job back. He just used me and moved on. That's what addicts do. And from that moment, I didn't have the same sane Peter. He put on a really serious show when he was talking. He runs away very quickly from things. He's talking to me. Maybe I'll just go to Australia. What? Just leave Sarah? Leave his kid? This and I could do that. It's all about him. You don't heal two narcissistic parents by empowering a narcissistic therapist to abuse someone and still be more worried about their own skin than anything else. And I have some pity because I'm specifically dealing with the addict in Peter. I'm not talking about who he is, and I'm not talking about the various expressions of who he is as a human being. When you're dealing with a disease, you have to focus on the pattern of the disease because this is in denial. We're at a point 4 years later where after multiple sexual abuse victims, I haven't even gotten an apology from the facilitators. So we're that bad in the thick of denial. But Jason Weston was quick to point out, as a way of avoiding my last clear request, that he said we're in a really undefended place. In other words, they're in deep delusion, because you can't get thicker into defense than pretending you're not defending when you're willing to sell out the entire life and soul of your organization and your clients to maintain a secret that is causing damage to that organization that you claim to to be protecting. So the board of directors' job is to contact me and meet with me, see that I get emergency support, and see that I come out of this on the other end. That's High's mission. And to fire, train, change, apologize as needed to see that this doesn't happen again, and to let the community know that Peter Sandhill has a psychological STI. Psychological diseases, when you're in a therapeutic relationship of trust, are more dangerous than herpes. If you've got a narcissistic therapist who will throw you under the bus and who is crazy, and you're paying them to learn how to navigate relationships, you are in far more danger than if they just inject herpes into your body. It shows up as some bumps, you know what to do with it, it's not going to kill you. You can break people's hearts. You can destroy people's lives when you've got a psychological STI and it's being masked. And so the board of directors' primary responsibility is to the community and the public they're serving. And so that's their job, is to protect me, let me know that they're at my back, and let me know that they're going to do whatever is necessary to see that I come out alive and healthy, and that whatever needs to be done to eliminate facilitator corruption and confusion, etc., will be done, and that it is not my fault. Now, this is a far cry, of course, from what happened. That's the ethical responsibility that will maintain trust. Meaning, when all this is out in the open, and a stranger asks me, so what did the board of directors do when they learned that Peter Sandhill had sexually abused you twice over a decade, that his wife had covered it up, and that what happened next? And I say, well, I never heard from a single board member. I was given a contract to promise never to tell anyone. You see how the doom of High is being written in these actions? The doom, the complete violation. Can you see a mother anxiously hoping her child goes off to be sexually educated? Or a trained, licensed therapist recommending another patient to High? Or someone saying, wow, you were educated at High. How fucked up are you? Can you see the disease? This is the destruction of the organization by the entire board of directors. Desiree Storch, who used to be my bookkeeper, seemed like a somewhat safe in. This seemed so crazy after a while that I wrote to her. I said, Desiree, are you being told what's going on? She says, they tell us what we need to know. I said, who? She says, well, they tell us. I said, can you give me the email addresses of the board of directors? She said, no. I said, please? No. She didn't want to know what was going on, and she didn't want the facilitators to know that she'd given out email addresses. She was part of the secrecy dynamic, the board of directors. And this was someone I liked, who had worked for me before as a bookkeeper. Now, does it get worse from there? Brian Martin contacted me at some point when I started escalating. As I say, you have to develop the manipulative personality to deal with dysfunction. So he said, Dane, do you want to talk? I said, Brian, at this point, I am so upset that I do not want to talk with anyone until I get a facilitator apology. He said, Dane, I don't think that's going to happen. Now, what he's saying as one of the leaders in the board of directors is that we are not committed to ethics here. We don't understand our responsibilities. Legally, professionally, morally, we don't understand what the gold is that we are destroying. Meaning when Brian told me that, he's telling me that I am absolutely useless as a public defender in a public nonprofit in a sexual abuse case. Brian Martin is taking off the mantle of leadership. He's saying, I'm not going to go public. I'm not going to resign. I'm not going to fire a facilitator. I'm not going to bring in an outside inquiry. I am going to say I'm sad. Well, Ann Watts was already sad. We already had plenty of sad people. I'm sad, but I don't think that's going to happen, meaning I'm not going to do my job. I don't think I'm going to do my job. Well, who wants to talk with someone who will not take a stand for this level of ethical negligence when it is causing more pain and damage than any other phenomena in my entire adult life? Who needs a board like that? The whole purpose of the board is to be independent. So the board crashes their organization into a pit by demonstrating behavior that no judge, I think it's the Director General, I forget, there's a form I have to fill out to submit this to the state of California. No jury can look at those emails from Brian and me and say, this is an independent board that knows what its job is and will protect the public interest. Because it isn't protecting public interest, even to that tiny little bit of apologizing. Do you realize how thick the defense is between where we can't even admit to ourselves how fucked up this is? So we can't apologize? We can't admit that we chose this guy, we trained him, we recommended him, we knew he didn't have a license, we didn't check on him, and now we turned this into PTSD? We can't admit that? Our own impact? But we want to teach healthy relationships? You see, it gets thick. And so the board of directors is responsible to the public, to the state of California, for behaving as a public nonprofit. That's there to the mission, to the public, to the state of California. They are not responsible to the facilitator egos, delusions, and addictions. However, in a paper board, what's happened is that the board of directors is loyal to the delusions and addictions of the facilitators, and they were chosen for that purpose. Because every addict, whether it's a power addict or a drug addict, picks people who won't get in the way of their things. If you're an opium addict, do you pick a woman who's going to take away your drug and say, over my dead body? Or do you pick someone who has a good connection with the opium and will always bring a little bit home for you? Who do you want? A lover for your addiction or a lover for your soul? So let's look at Sarah to the client and participant. So Sarah is in the same role as Ann Watts because she's done a couples therapy with me and a girlfriend with Peter Sandhill. So the deepest relationship I have with Sarah is not as a facilitator, it's as a couples therapist. There again, without the trust that the therapist is absolutely going to do what is in your best interest, you cannot open up enough to have couples therapy work. The whole premise of vulnerability is trust, and the whole premise of therapy is vulnerability. You think you're going to learn something? Going to a therapist, and they say, so tell me what's going on, and you say, no, I don't trust you, and you go out an hour later? No, it's trust. So Sarah betrayed my trust 15 years ago when she learned that her husband and the person she brought into high was sexually seducing a person while in therapy and charging for it and recommending he do MDMA and not going to the facilitators. Now, whose Sarah's first responsibility is to me, to see that I'm not confused and don't think that this is love or therapy. Because Peter is saying he's helping, and he's saying this is love. He loves me and he's attracted to me. And blah. The first job Sarah has to do is cut that out, because her loyalty is to her client, her patient. It'd be the same as if a doctor brings in a doctor's assistant, who happens to be her husband, to the hospital and tells the assistant they have to be this and this and this to keep the patient alive. And the doctor arrives back and finds that the assistant has dirty hands inside the flesh of the patient. They didn't wash their hands and there's no gloves. The very first action of a doctor we would trust is to get those hands out, sterilize the area, apologize, monitor it for wounds, take full responsibility, get the assistant off the field until they're properly trained, and to keep the patient alive. Why? Well, what happens if the patient dies and there's an inquiry and her husband goes to jail and she loses her license because she didn't bring in a trained assistant? She let an untrained assistant do a crappy job that endangered a person's life. So this is the ethics we're dealing here. Now, in a chauvinistic culture, we don't pay attention to feelings because those are feminine. But the emotional body, when you look at the high suicide rates in America, most of that is not physical. Most of that is these types of wounds perpetuated over and over and over by parents, by therapists, by lovers, to such a point that the pain is unbearable and they will kill their own physical body to get out of it. The emotional body is a real thing. It needs to be honored and respected, particularly if you want to be in the therapeutic business. Because what a school does, what an education school does, we're not talking about, training and running and doing gym work. We're talking about developing the mental and emotional body in a healthy way. And you can't do that while infecting it with lies and with toxic messages of worthlessness. You have a toxic message of worthlessness when your therapist doesn't bother to train to do ethical therapy. What's the message? They're not worth it and you're not worth it. If you were worth it, they would have trained. You have a toxic message of worthlessness when they know that, statistically speaking, escalating a sexual relationship in therapy goes wrong 99% of the time. Meaning ask 100 therapists, most of them have had some involvement with their patients at one time or another, because we don't raise adults in this country. So ask 100 therapists, did any of those work out? So you had there was one patient you fell for and da-da-da-da-da. Did it turn out well? 1 out of 100 times. Okay, so how can you ethically take money to do something that has a 99% chance of damaging your patient? Those aren't good odds. Those aren't even 50-50. A 99% chance of damaging your patient. Well, if you don't bother to study the literature, that's a message of worthlessness. I don't care about my work enough to bother being good at it, and I don't care enough about you to bother applying and learning good work. We're both worthless, so let's have a good fuck. Oh, it didn't work out? I never knew this was going to happen. I had no idea because I didn't even bother to study the literature because I knew best. Whatever. So the ethics, Sarah, to me, has to get me out of there safe and sane. That's the ethic. Why? Well, if I die, it's her husband that gets hit. And it's her that gets hit. And it's her organization that gets hit. You see, Sarah wouldn't have had the chance to abuse me without Hai. If Hai hadn't told me what a great person Sarah was, then I wouldn't have hired Sarah for couples therapy. Now, if Sarah betrays the trust back to Hai, by recommending a poorly trained person who happens to be her husband, she's damaging Hai, she's damaging herself, and she's damaging her husband, because when you damage the patient, you damage the trust, which is the foundation of every single relationship. Now, Sarah learned that she damaged the patient by recommending Peter, because her husband and co-facilitator that she wholeheartedly recommended to me in workshop was hurting me. Peter told me that he told her what he was doing, but because Peter was calling what he was doing love and attraction, and I didn't have a clear definition because the school that taught me about healthy sexuality didn't define what sexual abuse was and didn't give me a list of the facilitator agreements. They said, we have agreements. How about making those transparent so that we know exactly when you're breaking them? No. Why would we want you to know when we are breaking our own agreements? Well, so that we can support you to keep them. So that we cannot be participants in your lust delusions. That's why. So we can help you to overcome your addiction. That's why. Well, why would we want that? Well, if you want to be a school and a public nonprofit, that's what you have to do. So Sarah betrayed her husband, Hai, and me to cover up Peter's secret. And in doing so, she's protecting the marriage, which Peter is betraying. So she's not really protecting the marriage. Peter's broken that. She's protecting Peter's addiction so that he will not abandon her for his addiction. Because every addict who is asked to choose between the addiction and their partner chooses the addiction. If you want to keep an addict as a partner, don't come between them and their drug, or care about them enough to see that they get the full treatment and they're no longer an addict. Then and then only will they put the marriage and you first. So it's a risk, and it's not a good bet in America, by the way. It's not a good bet to be with an addict, and it's not a good bet that the addict will choose the relationship over the drug. It's not a good bet, and it's not a good idea to have an addict in a teaching around healthy relationship position. Peter is not the enemy. The addiction is the enemy. So the question is, can Hai, which doesn't offer any definition or support for addiction, in a highly addictive culture in which 1 in 7 Americans have a substance addiction, and a majority of Americans are addicted to compulsive feeling, thinking, and doing as deep pain management, in a highly traumatized culture, should you have someone in that state trying to teach when no one in the community is empowered with the definition and matrix to see addiction and abuse? Not even the facilitator agreements. You see, that's the facilitators treating the community as children. So that's Sarah's ethical responsibility. And the truth is that Peter sold out his soul doing this work in the way that he did. And Sarah helped him by covering it up 15 years ago and by tolerating his lies to such an extent that he knows he'll get away with it. Because apparently his pattern is not tell Sarah at the time and then kind of confess later and then she'll put up with it. I would not put up with that in a heartbeat. I don't care how sexy and attractive the person doing it is. If someone is repeatedly lying to me, they are out. Because they are sending a sword right into what's good in me. I don't lie. And I do not consider lies to be loving in any sense. It is a direct spear to something deeply healthy and sacred. If you want to do that, have the maturity to call it hatred, self-hatred, worthlessness, addiction. Don't call it love. And don't say you won't do it again when you're an addict. it'll continue until you meet a force equal or greater than the pain you're using to cover up with addiction. So that's Sarah's responsibility to me, is to come to me, undo the insanity, apologize for recommending Peter, tell me it's not my fault, and see that Peter gets help. That's her responsibility to me, and it is an equal responsibility to Hai and an equal responsibility to her husband, and it is a responsibility to her marriage. Why? Well, again, this isn't personal. Anytime Peter has to choose between an addiction and his son, who do you think he's going to choose? Most people treat a client better than their family. So if Peter is treating a client this bad for 10 years, how do you think he's treating his son? Now, it'll be as covert and covered in love and dripping as anything else. But that boy carries the brunt of this cover-up. Because this betrayal, when he tells that boy, I'm there for you, I'm going to be there, and then goes off and has another polyamorous fling, travels around this and does that, and is busy with endless amounts of frenetic activity. That boy doesn't have a father who's telling him that he matters. He matters enough to lie to, but does he matter enough to be first? Because every son needs a parent that'll put him first. Now, if Sarah puts up with Peter's collusion and tells her son how much Peter loves him, you see, it doesn't validate the emptiness, the fear, the loneliness, etc. in that child. Who sticks up for him? And if that boy grows up knowing innately that he's worthless because he's not even worth telling the truth, that we don't put you first, how's he going to treat a woman or a man, a partner, as if they're worth something when he hasn't gotten the signature? Now, these are not black and white things, and I am by no means suggesting that Peter is an unusually bad father. He may be an unusually good one in this family, in this culture. It's not about comparing. It's about naming what is abuse and what is healthy. So Sarah broke all of those responsibilities, and when I saw that she was afraid of me, what she was afraid of course, was that I would tell the truth. Because she knew that if I innocently talked to other people that, Peter Sandhill had shown sexual interest in me and wanted me to take MDMA, she knew that that was not a palatable truth. She did not shine as being complicit in that secret. Nor did Peter shine, nor did Hai shine. Everyone was damaged by the truth that a young man hired a well-recommended therapist to help his relationship and came out worse, being sexually abused and recommended to do illegal drugs. Peter wanted me to take them with him and pay him $600 in his house. Take time off work, drive to his house, and he thought this would be a great idea. Now, when I confronted him over this, he said, I don't like the man who did that to you. Well, that's you, Peter. And understandably, do you like the man that does that to people trying to learn about healthy sexuality? See, but the problem again is integrity. Peter didn't like the man who did that. But what about the man who heard that he did that and didn't offer a refund and asked to make amends? What about the man who's still doing therapy and not telling people that he has an addict side that does this? Do you like the man who covers his tracks and doesn't give refunds for sexual abuse? I don't like the man who did that. That's not a man, that's an addict. And Peter is constantly confused by the two, and he is not surrounded. This is where you come back to the betrayal pattern of his peers. I watched Peter make progress in understanding this by talking with me, and then go to the meeting in which I was the only one not invited by his peers, and he came out sicker. Peter is being set up to fail by people that call themselves his friend. Are they the friend of his addict, or are they the friend of his soul? He came out worse after that meeting. I think the reason I wasn't there is because I would have been the only one telling the truth in that meeting, and the truth was not welcome within the facilitator core. Well, how do you know? Well, what does a normal organization do when a client says that a core team member has been sexually abusing them to a point of trauma for 10 years? What does a normal, healthy, what does an ethical organization do? They meet with the abuse survivor. They get the story, which is what I asked. I said, let me tell you, and please hold me, because my body is shaking. I need something to calm this amount of grief and anxiety. Well, what's going to do that? Being held. Now, Peter Levine, in his book about trauma, etc., says this is a great protocol. You need reassurance, you need belonging, your body needs to calm down. Okay? The therapist is not intelligent, trained by high to do that. The client, with sheer dumb luck, asks for exactly what is needed, and the entire organization colludes to deny the medicine that would eliminate the probability of PTSD. And then his therapist comes on and says, you can't get support from the team and the community because we're interested in burying you, and I'm busy. And I really love you. I want you to know this love isn't going to go anywhere. Now just hang with me and keep my secrets, and you'll be loved. Except a few days later, when the PTSD really hit on, I made a recording to every facilitator and said, I have never felt more pain in my life. Since I contacted you, the entire body, my pain is up 500%. It's off the charts. Now, my therapist, Ann Watts, Peter Sandhill, Sarah Sandhill, I think Barbara Musser was out at that point, didn't think that was worth mentioning. If you go to a hospital and an insane doctor starts cutting your legs open, and then you call the supervisor of the hospital, and they look at the mess and decide this is a disaster for the hospital, and they call a staff meeting to figure out how to cover it up while the patient bleeds out in the room, and you call again and say it's 5 times worse. It's not getting better because you're excluding me from the meeting. It's getting worse. And there is complete deafening silence. You have complicity in murder in that moment. And any informed jury will find complicity in murder in that scenario. Well, of course, we're only talking about the human heart, that thing which is capable of love and being part of a world where everyone wins, that insignificant feminine in a chauvinistic culture. But this is Sarah's responsibility to me. Now, Sarah's responsibility to Peter is twofold: to fight the addiction and to apologize to him for enabling it. She is not doing him any favors. She is killing him. When you're an addict and you're fed the lies that make you feel better, you kill the soul, the health in that addict. It's very, very sad, the dynamic, the way the closest friends in so many ways give the drug that kills the friend. Because the friend's an addict. They just keep giving the drug. The drug is lies. A little bit of truth. And a little bit of support. And Peter's confused, but he comes around. But what do? You say that, anyway, it's very sad to watch Peter go down and understand that he doesn't have support. That the primary message is we've got to protect High's image. Well, that's how he learned to protect his own image. Sacrifice the client, protect the image of the organization. Peter is not the most sick person in this, and you can see that also in his innocence. If he was really sick, he wouldn't have allowed me to record the 10-hour session. He thought it was great. He thought the whole thing was great and he was wonderful. Now, any trained therapist looks at it and says, this is beyond the pale. The client opens their mouth and says that you abused them 10 years ago and you shut them up? That's great. What do you think the point of therapy is? To help the client see what's being repressed in... this is astounding. And you think it's great to recommend someone like that? You see, we learn from our teachers. And this is where we come to Dane's ethical responsibility to the public. So High has taught 40,000 people. Who knows how many of them have PTSD from complications in the community? Who knows how many have been sexually abused? Who knows how many have STIs? Who knows how many people are blaming themselves and feel shamed? Who knows how many people are mildly crazy and have no idea how to handle another addict? Who knows? I think it's over 5%, but who knows? Now, why is it that 40 years later, this is not being talked about? Well, I think it's pretty obvious if you look at the lengths to which the facilitator body, with the complicity of the board, has gone to silence me, why the story doesn't come out. Because if you've been shamed and you've been abused with a message that you don't matter enough to be fought for, then you've got to heal that message and come back that I do matter enough to be fought for, and I'm going to fight for myself when nobody else is fighting for me. And then I've got to go beyond that and fight for the next person. That's an unusual thing to pull off in this culture. Because men aren't supposed to care. And Americans aren't supposed to care about other people. And sexual abuse is supposed to be shameful, particularly for men. Do you know how many men? If you sexually abuse 100 American men who are heterosexual behind closed doors, and then you take them out in public and say, how many men in this room have been sexually abused by another man? 2 to 5 are going to raise their hand. 95 are going to be ashamed and silent. Now, I didn't get the memo, apparently. So it was a bit rude of me to put up my hand and say, hey, I've been sexually abused by a man. Happened to be my therapist. I paid for it. Well, this won't do. So I experienced Peter's anger, Anne's fear, the complete ostracization by the facilitator body, the betrayal, but Ryan Martin not willing to do his own job to get me an apology. Now, Brian knows it's wrong. There isn't anyone who doesn't know that this is off. No one. Not a single person. Peter may be a bit confused because he's led around a bit, but not a single person. Brian said he was crying. But he wouldn't say what he's crying about because that breaks the taboo of the secret. If he says he's crying because he signed up on the board of directors to try and do something good in the world, and he doesn't have the votes and support to stay in a sense of belonging, and this feels like home for him, and people are going to rat him out and punish him just like they're doing with me if he tells the truth, and he won't have a home anymore, and he's crying about that. What is he crying about? Whatever it is, he is betraying his role. He is not an independent board member committed to protecting public safety. And I get the message from Brian, you're not worth fighting for. Because I'm quite comfortable where I am, and I might get uncomfortable if I went up against the addiction in this power structure. So the addiction is protected. The client, their dignity, their heart, their health, their life is thrown under the bus. Sarah's responsibility to Peter, and ethical, is to apologize and help him see where he's off, what is and isn't love, to apologize for not turning him in, 10 years ago, for confronting him and for letting him run ripshod with his lies, delusions, and getting away with it, thus training an addict. And her responsibility is to say, Peter, I love you enough that you matter more than your addiction. So if you are going to fight me and you're going to lose our marriage and you're going to lose high, and all you're going to have is your addiction. And the truth will be known. You don't get to keep your drug and go on to hurt the next innocent person with all that charm. No. Everyone will know exactly what happened. Now, do you want to be an adult and start growing up? You want to stay a kid and an addict? What's it going to be, Peter? That's her love to the man that Peter could become without his addiction. Well, that's the ethical path. Why? Because she has no business referring Peter if he's not doing that. She shouldn't be married to him if he's going to portray what's good in her. She shouldn't have brought him into high. She's betraying high if she doesn't. And she doesn't exist. She doesn't get any work, and she doesn't get workshops and stuff if she betrays high and high throws her out. She owes it to high, the community, to herself and her husband to take that path. And she sells everyone else out when she refuses to publicly write about this issue. Her responsibility ethically is to the community. I have let in an addict into our community, and I have protected him, and he has hurt this person and this person and this person under my protection. I betrayed your trust. I did it out of my own fear of being left alone, because most addicts don't choose their women, and I'm an older woman. I'm insecure about that in this fucked up culture in which age is not seen as an asset. Finally I found this lovely man, at least seemed so lovely, who did this. He's lost a lot of my money. He's betrayed this and that, and now I feel like I have nothing. And I'm not going to let him run ripshod into this community. I'm worth more, you're worth more, and he's worth more. Don't succumb to the addiction. This is the pattern. He's played it out multiple times. Here's how we heal a pattern if we're committed to win-win. Will he run away from the whole community, or will he sign up for healing protocol and become a participant again? And maybe to be a teacher. Because Peter's in a great position to teach about the damages of addiction, about the betrayal of the self, about exactly how he got into that rut, about how he was enabled. Peter could teach something really useful now and be loyal to the community. But will he do it? Is that important enough? Or is there some other thing? So that's Sarah's ethical framework to Peter. Sarah to high is to let the facilitators and the board know exactly what's going on and to invite them and encourage them to do what is best for the mission. If a boss gives you a job and refers you work and all that, and the thing goes sour, you apologize to the boss. I let you down. You gave me work. I let you down. We let you down as a couple. I'm sorry. This has come back to bite you. I'm sorry. I'm going to clean it up. I've got an idiot husband who thinks this has nothing to do with him and shouldn't even give her. I don't care. I'm going to make this right. I brought him in. You've gotten burned by this. We're taking care of it. That's her commitment to high. In other words, if Sarah wants a sustainable relationship with high, how do you think the facilitators will feel when they lose all their houses because they go down in smoke trying to defend this position? Because my ethical responsibility, Dane, to public, is to look at who's been sexually abused, what help do they need, how has the wool been pulled over their head, and what can be done to help them. That's the responsibility to the public, meaning I want to live in a world where if people go to a school to learn about healthy relationships, they don't come back sick. That's what I want. So the ethical framework is if I see disease, if I see sickness and corruption in a system, I have to diagnose and report the system to the public. And if I want a healed public after they're diagnosed, I need to participate in a way that leads to a healed public. Starting with the truth. This person has AIDS. They're not a bad person. Don't sleep with them without a condom. This person has hepatitis. They're not a bad person. But they can damage this and this and this, and they don't know what they're doing, so stay away from them. This person has shame and blah, 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 blah. They're not a bad person, but they're an addict, and they will destroy you if you give them the chance. They need to be treated with caution. This is how you love the healthy part in that person and the community. That's my ethical responsibility to the public and my ethical responsibility to a world and a future I want to live in. Now, the facilitator's job is to decide point by point where they are loyal to their disease and where they are loyal to their mission. Nothing I'm saying is antithetical to the mission. What I'm saying is in direct contradiction to a number of unanimously acted on facilitator positions that are doing damage, that have done damage, that have endangered my life, and that will continue to harm everyone involved until those positions are unwound and demasked. Now, this is my ethical responsibility to the public. Meaning, if you need to be abused and are too frightened of the pain of recognition of the past abuse, that this feels more threatening than reenacting the abuse cycle, you now have freedom to reenact the abuse cycle with somebody else. But if with this level of coherence you don't want to do that again and want to seek help somewhere else or be a little bit more aware, you have the ability to do that somewhere else as well. But I want a world in which you have that choice. If I want that world, it's my ethical responsibility to know that you will not get that world unless I speak. So it's my ethical responsibility to speak. That's my responsibility to that world that I want to live in. Now, Dane, to the facilitators. What is my ethical relationship with the facilitators of trust? Well, there is a very long, if we look, I'll deal with Peter separately, but when I saw High going off, first of all, I told them exactly what was going on in a 45-minute recording. Give them the data. Give them the truth. 2, I told them what I needed that would have been a great thing if I received. If they did that, there'd be no PTSD. All of their lives improve. Thirdly, I told them I wanted to talk and was happy to meet with them, of course. Well, their response was to meet behind closed doors and not include me and not even tell me what went on. I learned that later, some of the control dynamics that went on there that actually damaged me. That's my responsibility to the facilitators, is to give them the chance to do the right thing. I wrote to Jason Weston, and I told him, you cannot win or control a dirty secret in the information age. I told all the facilitators, this is the information age. You can't behave this way. It's not like just because Peter refuses to respond to his emails while abusing a patient, that controls the whole internet. I said, you're in the information age. You used to be able to silence people and not let them in the room and whatever if they were going to talk. Whatever. You can't do that. So, of course, that's exactly what they tried to do with cutting me off the list. And then they launched a lawsuit to try and shut down the website. And, of course, they lost because I'm not interested in making money. I'm interested in educating the public about sexual abuse. And I wrote that to the arbiter. I said, what is a student at a school who has been sexually abused supposed to do when the entire organization is so corrupt that rather than telling the story to the community themselves, they demand that for the community to know their patient has to tell the community what they're supposed to do ethically? I said, what other choice do I have than to spend my money to educate the public that these people are teaching under false pretenses to protect the public? Well, obviously the arbiter agreed with me, so High wasted $2,000 of nonprofit money minimum, plus all their meetings and coordinations, in their efforts to silence the voice of a sexually abused participant. Well, how's that working for them? You see, when you have a good protocol, it works. And unfortunately, when your teacher embodies the most unhealthy aspects of the abuse culture, that works too, but it works to teach people the exact wrong thing they need to learn. So that's why I also have an ethical responsibility to myself. You see, if I let this go down this way, then I'm accepting High's lesson to me. The lesson that we fuck up, we don't prepare, we hurt people, we take their money, and then we cover it up and we get away with it and we call it love. That's how we get by in this world. Now, if I say, oh, I guess you're my teacher, I guess that's what I'll do. So how do you reject that lesson? Well, one of the things is to change the narrative. If they hang to these positions and everyone goes bankrupt in court, and then the whole community starts talking about the sexual abuse, then I have a different lesson I'm teaching myself, which is, no, when people refuse to follow the laws of physics, when people actively attack those community members who are most healthy in trying to tell them the truth and don't want them in favor of people who will suppress the secret, out of shame and out of delusions, that it catches up with you in the end, and what remains is a revitalized community in some other form. Well, that's obviously a lesson I'd like to learn, because there's a lot of corrupt power structures out there, starting with my town mayor, who's spending money to cause homelessness. And I'd like to challenge him in the same way, and I'd like to know that there's some reasonable chance that the story ends well. It also ends well if the facilitators turn tail and say, oh, fine, you caught us. We'll own up. We'll start a fund. We'll bring in the experts. We'll become a healthy school. Even better. But the commitment to myself is to not to have spent money to learn how to be sick and then feel worthless that I wasn't worth fighting for. That's the commitment to myself. And it's my commitment to my wife as well. Because if I learn that I am so worthless, that not a single member in this community, that not a single facilitator, that not a single board member will stand up in public and fight for the honest truth that is black and white in front of them, well, how valuable, how hard is it for one individual to have 1,000 people looking at them and saying, no, you're not worth that. Yeah, I know it's true and I know it's shitty. You're just not worth me fighting for it. You're nothing. I wasn't, I don't like people with mustaches. You never did it for me anyway. You're not worth it. Like, how can you take that amount of worthlessness being directed by a school of love and still say, I'm really important, and so I should develop myself so I can be a good husband? No, I'm worthless. So then how am I going to treat my wife? You see? This is for her. The fight to say that we are worth something. We're worth learning psychology before trying to teach it. We're worth getting licensed. We're worth following professional ethics. We're worth telling the truth. We're worth apologizing to. We're worth stopping the lies. We're worth firing some person who doesn't know what he's doing. We're worth that. We matter. This is not a myth. This is not personal. Is your daughter not worth fighting for a world in which she doesn't get PTSD from her therapist? Is she worth that to you? Maybe. How are you going to get there? If you teach her and everyone else that they're not worth it, and we know we're part of one ecology. This is not personal. Every child that sees us drive by a homeless person and treat them like shit as if they don't exist understands that they have no value in this culture without money, understands their own parent will only value them if they make the parent look good with grades and with money. It's not the kid that matters. It's the degree. It's the performance. And then we wonder why so many Americans feel like imposters, because they've sold their own soul to develop an adaptive personality. They know it's not them. They know it's not real, and they know that the real them would be hated because it has been hated since birth. So they develop all the success and all the money, and they get all the thing, and they feel like a fake. Because they are. Because the fake was desired, and the truth was betrayed. And then you go to a feeling, to try and manipulate you to how to feel like your fake personality is your real personality, rather than actually discover who the real personality is because it's worth discovering. Novel idea in America. My ethical commitment to the facilitators is to give them plenty of time, meaning when they looked at the website also, I told them about it, to see what they'd done wrong. That was also a commitment. That was for them. Meaning I wanted the facilitators to move a little bit closer to the reality where a truth comes out and give them a chance to respond. Well, they started the lawsuit. So, the healthy part, there's a healthy part in every facilitator. You don't think Ann Watts is cut up about this? You don't think Felicia Williams is worried about losing her hard-won license? I think she's one of the few that actually bothered to get licensed. This isn't personal. This is a participant, a client, a patient, a community member being systematically, for more than a decade, sexually abused, shamed, made crazy, traumatized, given PTSD, and then pushed out of the community by force to protect the secret of the abuse while everyone stands by and watches. And that brings me to the next point, which is, what is the community's ethical responsibility to an abuse survivor in this situation? So let's look at Rich Pascoe, active in the community, an intern. I tell them I've been him. He writes to me and wishes me happy birthday on LinkedIn. So I write back to him. I say, thanks, Rich. We dialogue a little bit. And I said, Rich, do you want to help? I've been sexually abused by Peter Sandhill, blah, 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 blah. Do you want to help mediate and help something come out of this? He does not respond. In other words, I don't want your truth. I don't want to participate. Now I'm not singling Rich out. This is the pattern within the Human Awareness Institute community. And this is the problem with fruiting trees. The students learn how the teachers behave. So when Ann Watts can't stand up for her own client and go public, how's a participant going to say, look, every one of those facilitators that I'm trusting has not come public about this. So I'm going to have to go against all of my teachers if I take a stand. That's overwhelming. As a team member, you're going to understand that if I'm asking a team member for help, it means the entire facilitator body and board hasn't done its job. Do you as a team member want to risk all those relationships and be cast out like me because they said, hey, this isn't right, and I'm going to tell people, and then you were persona non gratis and hated, and your secrets and your vulnerabilities were exploited by your therapists? You see, it's a difficult situation. So that was the end of Rich Pascoe. Most team members said nothing. A couple wrote and talked about past abuses. It was always the people outside of the community that said that's terrible. The people inside the community, they've got divided loyalties, like Anne. It's like, I want to go to another workshop and have sex. Am I still going to be able to, So the ethical responsibility, is first of all, value your own soul, your own dignity, etc., more than getting it on with a group of strangers in a room, particularly when the love falls apart so flimsily, as one of my friends complained, why he's not doing high. It's like, I'm tired of these weekend relationships. That's not love. We don't need to learn to have a marriage like Peter and Sarah Sandhill that's thrown apart at the drop of a bucket. This is nothing new. That's normal America. And so the trust, is again what is to be expected. See, because when the community stands by and tolerates me, and I tell the facilitator, meaning I told the facilitators I would write to the community. I did. They shut me off the email list, so then I wrote off of my list. Now, the ethical position, meaning as a community member, do you want to be sexually molested under the influence of psychedelics? Yes or no? If you do not, how is that going to happen? Well, of course, you can avoid that, but you have to also understand, if someone wants to hurt you, you can't just say, oh, okay, I won't take psychedelics. Okay. How about being driven crazy? How about being, had sexual interest? And it's like, if someone doesn't know what they're doing, and, okay, so you move them out of the Porsche into a little beater, they're still going to drive the beater into a tree. So, and if it's not personal, how are you going to escape? I did $100,000 of therapy with more than 4 high practitioners and 20 other practitioners before this happened. And people told me they thought I really knew what I was talking about. And Ann Watts told me she thought I had a genius level of self-awareness. Did I see this coming? Not consciously. Unconsciously, I may have noticed my dad and Peter or something like that. But, did I say, oh gosh, I'm paying money to develop PTSD? No. So you're going to keep the same system in place that nearly killed me because it's not going to kill you? That's not sane. So your job is, it doesn't matter if you like me. There's nothing to do with that. If you care about yourself, if you care about your culture, if you care about your country, if you care about your facilitators, your job is to vote with your money, your voice, and your feet to say, I'm taking a stand for this because it's the best path to well-being. It's the best path to a place where everything wins. The first step is to get sexual abusers out of teaching position, either by teaching them not to abuse, hard to believe if they won't even apologize, or by getting them not to teach. they can sexually abuse people as a student. At least people don't get confused as much with the message and don't have to pay for it. So that's the job of the community to Dane, and the community betrayed its role, modeling its teacher. With silence, some shame, there were a few men who said, "I've never liked you anyway." That's a great time to hear about the room of love, right? Come to High, where you can be in the room of love. You too can be sexually abused for more than a decade. When it comes to light, we'll disown you and sue you to silence. And when you tell the community, they will take that moment to point out their personal grievances with some this or that or the other that they didn't want to bring up when you could have dealt with it. Let's bring it up when you have PTSD and need support. And then let's mostly be silent. And then let's drive you crazy by calling this love. See, this is an incredible betrayal by anyone. You see, it doesn't even matter if it's High. If you're in a country that treats sexual abuse people in this way, you are setting your daughter and your son up to be massacred, and you know it. But are you part of the cycle? You see, where is the character? Where is the discipline to say, a human being is a human being. We're not going to put it up with it here because we're not going to put up with it over there because we don't want it coming to our kids. That's the ethical path for the community. I am not giving these folks another dime until they come clean. How about that? You think they're going to carry on talking to nobody? You see, but what about my sexual addiction? What about my little fix? What about my little party? I don't want to give that up so they can keep their addiction. I'll keep mine. We'll all be happily addicted together as the culture goes down the tubes. So the community to Dane, my commitment to Peter and my ethical responsibility to Peter was relatively thick, not perfect by any means. This was my first psychedelic experience. So I read 2 books. I read Acid Test and I read Food for the Gods. And I thought I knew what I was doing. I also tested a mushroom at 1/20th of one mushroom. I got a noticeable buzz. And my thought was 20 times that would be a great starting base. So I said to Peter, I'd like to take 1 mushroom. He said, no, you've got to take 3. I said, Peter, I've tested this. I have a sensitive body. I had a dream recently. I had a dream of being flooded with a tsunami, just swamped. I'd like to take 1 mushroom. No. He sat there and argued. So I did my best to protect Peter. Literally fought with him physically. That's my ethical responsibility to Peter. I don't want to set him up to fail. Well, he's determined. 2, I spent an hour and a half paying him $175 an hour, telling him about everything that had ever gone wrong in therapy before, so that he would have a map of things to avoid. He wasn't very interested in that. He was anxious that we were getting behind schedule. And I was anxious because I knew he was anxious, and I know Peter's impatient and wants to get on. So I didn't go into as much as I might have, as if he'd said, Dane, we can do this another day. You can tell me all about it because your well-being matters more than me looking good or being on schedule. So, anyway, so I did that part. And the first thing out of my mouth in the psychedelic session, as it came on, I said, Peter, you really hurt me 10 years ago. Now, this was an opening for Peter, as the neutral sitter, to say, tell me more. How did I hurt you? Obviously, this needs to come up if this is in a psychedelic session and this has been buried here. So I want to know all about, I'm here for you. What do you need? Well, then I could go in. But, of course, Peter is not interested in seeing his addictions. So, in a very soothing voice, he tells me that he's ready to move on. I don't want to upset my therapist. He's not interested. Later on in the session, I tell him that he has blind spots that he's not seeing clearly. He argues with me about that for 5 minutes. He assures me he has no blind spots, so he's dodged that bullet of truth. I wouldn't begin the session without having 5 days of support after the session. So he manages to dodge that bullet by being late for the very first support session and not telling me he would be late and not returning calls, which completely broke the container of trust, and it reenacted the early childhood attachment dynamic. Right after the peak, he took it into a dive, which completely overrode the ego and left me freaked out. So he manages to plunge the first day, sabotage that session. It's the only therapy in my entire life where that's occurred. No therapist has ever been late, and if it got near the session and they need to be rescheduled, they called me. So Peter managed to be completely virginal terrain with all therapy after the pinnacle of a peak, which he pushed me into repeatedly, because the high mushroom dose wasn't good enough. After that, I got overwhelmed and dissociative. Then he reminded me to take MDMA twice. So the first psychedelic experience, the first combination experience, way over the top. This is Peter Sandhill pushing his client over a cliff. Now, I went into a channeling state in the psychedelic experience, and in that state, I told him to take money out of the relationship. I told him that dozens of times. I told him that his love was the most important thing. I told him he needed to learn to be a king and take a stand consistent with his promise. I told him I needed 9 months to integrate the session and I would need his help. And I told him that, to include Sarah, to take care of Sarah in this whole process. And I told him I needed to know what our romantic relationship was after he escalated it during the session. And after I fell in love with him, I said, I need to know what it is. What is it that this is? I need a container. Well, he managed to throw every single one of those things out of the way. I also asked him to go into the deepest wound and be there with me, which is the child that was shoved down there to protect. Basically, Peter is enacting the father wound in this entire psychedelic session at 100 times leverage, because I'm dissociative in the psychedelic session, which bypassing my defenses. So Peter is reenacting the father wound at 100x. And I'm guiding him out of that, and he's shoving me back in with moral superiority and trust me, that kind of dynamic. It's impossible to help an addict, but it's also impossible to see an addict when your dad was an addict and punished the hell out of you for trying to push that. Meaning every person in my position knows that the addict, much like Sarah knows, that the addict will choose their drug over the patient and the truth. And so if you need someone because they've convinced you into a psychedelic or a dissociative or an emotionally dependent state, you need someone, and they start resisting the truth, you can either go along with their lies and fly blind, or you can be punished and disowned and shamed for it. Well, in that highly dissociative and needing state, you cannot afford that shame abandonment protocol at that leverage. It'll destroy the psyche. And if I die, of course, it's not doing Peter any favor. He will be accused of murder because he has systematically murdered the client he was ethically bound to protect. Again, just take 100 men, put them through Peter Sandhill's protocol for more than a decade, give them psychedelics and have Peter do his thing, and see how many men maintain dignity, maintain sanity, maintain their life over the next year with Peter and Hyde doing what they're doing, and you will see the death rate and what that exactly leads to. The facilitator body is directly responsible for causing the murder of a percentage of its people in that domain. I'm in a 3% category, meaning the person who's here talking to you like this, in this way, after this, is less than 3% of those 100 men. Take 1,000 men, it's less than 3% are at this level. Now I'm in 8 out of 10 pain in a number of areas of my psyche. And I am split apart because my teachers and people I care about are split apart. Because I understand that this is not personal, and I understand the connective framework that links this pattern with the culture of shame and the culture of abuse that I live in. That culture is the most miserable part of my life. It has taken everything beautiful in me and given me crumbs and lies. And I understand how these facilitators play into this culture and how the culture plays into these facilitators. I know it's not personal. And it is horrifying to see this reality. It is horrifying to understand that a truth teller in this circle will be met with this level of passivity, silent shame, and secrecy. An environment in which very few people can become awake without reaching a level of excruciating pain in which they would do anything to shut it down. And I've consciously addicted myself, mostly to food and sugar and sleep dissociation, in order to manage this pain, because the real horror is, when I went into this all of this was called love by Peter and Anne, etc. And Anne at one point said, that man, he's not safe for you. Okay, that's not personal, Anne. So how is it that Peter Sandhill was recommended by you to other innocent participants? See, you don't believe. The deepest embodiment of belief is action. Ann Watts asked me to pay her to advise me to participate in high secrecy protocol. I refused, calling the bluff to a certain extent because she said she was there to love me. Then she wanted some money. I said no. So she got it from Peter. Well, that's more appropriate because she's being bribed by Peter not to go public with his shame and abuse cycle. The trouble is she's betraying the community in that action, because the community needs to know. Now, my integrity with my soul suggests, I never knew what evil was. I never had a visceral sense until I started having dreams in which I understood the feminine energy trying to be born and being systematically punctured with knives. And I understood the collusion of our power structure and that dynamic. And I connected it to what was going on here. And I understood, this is what evil is. When innocence that trusted, paid money, believed, and was led into destruction, and then covered up to protect the abuse cycle. It doesn't get worse than that. You cannot have innocence survive that pattern. Innocence turns into bitterness and to cynicism, which is far less valuable as building ingredients for a beautiful culture. Innocence gives rise to love, gives rise to trust, gives rise to beauty, to truth, to goodness. Innocence can build everything we say we want, including a world where everyone wins. The facilitators have participated in a murder protocol of innocence. And every single person who stood by and done nothing has co-created that reality by causing and allowing it, and it is not personal. It is profoundly evil. It will destroy our culture, And it is destroying our culture. Our president is doing this as we speak.